The 8th commandment of the Torah is lo tignoiv, which means do not steal. What is the meaning of do not steal? To explain this on 5 levels, on Pshat, Remez, Drush, Soid, and also Chasidus. The level of Pshat, on the simple level, Rashi tells us that we are dealing here with kidnapping. That the prohibition of the Torah of do not steal means do not steal other human beings and sell them for slaves. And by doing so, you are violating this commandment. Furthermore, the Baal HaTurim tells us that the gematria, the numerical computation of the word lo tignov, has the same number as the computation of gonev nefesh, which means to steal a soul, to steal a person, which both of them equal 491, with the koilel is 492. The Sefroinoi says that even though it says lo signov, however, in general, it represents 3 levels of stealing. Number 1, of course, not to kidnap. Number 2, not to steal money. And number 3, geneves das, which means intellectual property. If somebody made an invention, you cannot steal that invention and sell it. Similarly, the prohibition of window shopping. In other words, you look into the window and you see something you like, you run into the store, how much is this? You have no intention of buying the object whatsoever. You simply want to kill some time, and therefore you strike up a conversation with the owner of the store. That is also a prohibition. That is called geneves das. You make the owner think you're buying something. In reality, you had no plans on buying it whatsoever. So all of these go into the category of lo signov, do not steal. The Kli Yakar tells us, as we explained over the last few weeks, that the 1st commandment is paralleled with the 6th commandment, the 2nd with the 7th, and the 3rd with the 8th. And that is because God gave us 2 tablets, not 1 tablet. He could have given all 10 commandments on 1 piece of stone, but the fact that he gave 5 and 5 is because each of them parallel one the other. So the commandment of lo signov, do not steal, parallels the 3rd commandment of leitisa, to not carry the name of God in vain. In other words, not to swear in vain. And he goes on to say that the connection between these 2 is that one who steals ultimately will swear falsely. Because when they will accuse him of stealing, he'll say, I never stole, I swear, I never did it. So one who steals ultimately will come to swear falsely. Number 2, says the Kli Yakar, that one who steals makes believe as if God does not see. And similarly, one who swears falsely, he too makes it as if the eye of God does not see. This is the pshat. This is the simple interpretation of this commandment. What is the remez? What is the hint? So to twist this around, and by saying that lo tignov, do not steal, means in essence that we should give charity. Don't steal the charity of the poor. And therefore be generous and give to others. So we find that the remez, the hint over here, is found in the teachings of the Orach Chaim HaKadosh. The Orach Chaim says, on the verse in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 9, he says like this, the Torah tells us, if there will be a man that is destitute, one of your brothers, therefore you shall surely open up your hand and give him generously. So the Orach Chaim says, the word mi'achad achecha, from one of your brothers, means the chosen of your brothers. And that is the one that was chosen by God himself to be the ultimate king of the Jewish people, which is the Mashiach. And therefore we yearn. Evyon means we yearn for the coming of Mashiach. Furthermore, he says that Mashiach himself yearns and desires to take the Jewish people out of Golus. We find an interesting teaching in the Zohar. The Zohar says, in the portion of Vayakhel, it says that when they tell the Mashiach of the problems and the sufferings of the Jewish people, and how they are truly suffering in exile, says the Zohar that Mashiach raises his voice and he cries. He cries over the pains and the sufferings of the Jewish people and the fact that they are so long in exile. So this is the meaning of when one of your brothers will be destitute. This represents the Mashiach who is destitute, for it says the Mashiach will be a poor person riding on a donkey. And therefore the Torah hints to this concept in this phrase of charity. Because through charity we bring about the coming of the Mashiach, we bring an end to the exile. The Druse, the homiletics, the Torah says, Ki faseich tiftach, and nosein titein loy. It says that when a poor man comes to you, you shall surely open up your hand and you shall surely give him. Now there's a question in halacha, what quantifies the giving of charity? Is the giving of charity primarily quantity? To give the poor man tzedakah, to give him money, to pay his rent, to help him pay for his electric bill? Or is it how you give it? To show empathy and to tell the poor man, I feel terrible that you're in this dire situation, that you are destitute, and I feel your pain and it's a terrible thing, and how can I help you? So is the empathy part of the mitzvah of tzedakah, or is it not part of the mitzvah? Rashi says that the giving of the tzedakah, which is the quantity, and the empathy, which is the quality, are both mutually symbiotic. And therefore they're one thing. From the Rambam, it seems that they're two separate things. The giving of tzedakah is one thing, and number two, the proper way of giving tzedakah is to be sympathetic towards the poor man and to feel his pain. What is the nafka bina? What is the difference between the two opinions? The difference would be as follows. According to Rashi, it's better to give less money to the poor man, but to give it properly with feeling and emotion and empathy. And according to the Rambam would hold that it's more important that you give the poor man all the money he needs, even though you would give it to him without sympathy, without empathy, without feeling his pain. Another question, or another way of looking at it. What happens if you give a poor man charity, but the poor man refuses to take the charity? Have you fulfilled the mitzvah of giving tzedakah or not? Perhaps we can say that according to Rashi, yes, you have fulfilled the mitzvah of giving tzedakah, because you did yours. You had the sympathy, you had the empathy, and you cared about the person, and you spoke to the person, and you made the person feel better. The fact that he refused your money, that's not your problem. You set aside that money, and you are willing to give it to him, and therefore you get the mitzvah of tzedakah. According to the Rambam, it would seem that the most important thing is that the poor man receives the money. And as long as he did not receive the money, you have not fulfilled the mitzvah of tzedakah. Which explains another interesting detail, and that is, why don't we make a bracha on the mitzvah of tzedakah? We make a bracha on lulav and esrog, we make a bracha on Shabbos candles, we make a bracha when we immerse in a mikveh. So why don't we make a bracha when we give charity, tzedakah? So the Rashba makes this point that it's possible that the poor man will not accept it. So how can you make a mitzvah, how can you make a bracha on this mitzvah? So this is the drush. This would be the halachic approach to the mitzvah of loy signov. Soid, the esoteric. It says in the book of Proverbs that tzedakah tereimem goy, that tzedakah, charity, elevates a nation. So the Rebbe points out that the Jewish people pride themselves on two levels. God tells us we are to be mamleches kohanim, we are to be a kingdom of priests, and He tells us we should be goy kodesh, a holy people. When it comes to a kingdom of priests, just like a priest is in the holy temple, that's his place. When a Jew is in his place, in the synagogue, in the yeshiva, studying Torah, they are on an elevated level. They don't need to be elevated with tzedakah. When do they need to be elevated with tzedakah, with charity? When they are goy kodesh, when they are a holy people. Because they are a nation, they are a people amongst all the other people. So therefore, when they are involved with the business world, and they are involved with all the other nations and with politics, it's possible that the Jew, being that he is involved with earthliness, that he could sink from his spiritual level. And therefore, the way you become elevated is through giving charity. And in the word goy, which means nation, we have a gimel, a vav, and a yud. The gimel represents the three lower attributes. The vav represents connecting the lower attributes with the yud, which is chachma, intellect, which is the highest of the attributes. And therefore, through charity, we are elevating goy, we are elevating the nation from the lowest levels, from the gimel to the vav, and then to the yud. And this also enhances the teaching of what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. Why is tzedakah considered to be the biggest mitzvah? Because when it comes to any other positive commandment of the 248 positive commandments, primarily each commandment is connected with a specific limb of the body. So you daven with your mouth, you eat kosher with your mouth, you put tefillin on your hand, and you put tefillin on your head, etc., etc. However, when it comes to tzedakah, when it comes to charity, this is money that you worked very hard for. You sweat and you cry and you get emotional and you work very hard to make these few pennies, to make these few dollars. And now you take it away and you give it to the poor person. So in essence, you're elevating the entire body because you put your entire body into making a living. So not only does it elevate one part of the body, the finger or the head or the mouth or the arm, but through tzedakah you're able to elevate the entire body. And by elevating the entire body, you're also elevating the entire around your house and your community, etc., etc. So this is the idea. Through charity, we elevate a nation, we elevate a people. What does Chassidus say? The previous Rebbe said that when it comes to giving tzedakah, we have to realize that this money that you give tzedakah was not yours. That God gave you that money for the poor man. And that's the poor man's money. You're holding that money as security. When the poor man comes and he asks for tzedakah, really he's asking for his money. So what you're doing is giving the poor man back his money. According to the Torah, one should give 10% to tzedakah. One who's generous gives 20% to tzedakah. The Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya that nowadays when we have no sacrifices, in essence you can give more than 20%. So at least 20% belongs to the poor man. And when the poor man comes and requests tzedakah, you're giving him back his money. And this perhaps also enriches the teaching of the Kli Yakar that parallels the first 5 and second 5 commandments. What is the connection between this commandment, do not steal, and the commandment, do not carry the name of God in vain? So we explained, when we discussed the third commandment, that the name of God is the 4 letters of God's name. The Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey. It is with these letters that God created the world. And therefore, when God created the world, He created not only the physical world, but He also created time and space. And He created all of history. And He created every human being. And He created each person, whether he'd be rich or poor. And therefore, if God says this man will have $100 million, out of that $100 million, $10 million belong to the poor man. Comes the poor man and now says, I need this money. I need to pay the teachers in the yeshiva. We're 5 weeks back. We haven't paid the teachers already 5-6 weeks. We owe thousands of dollars. The mortgage is a few $1 million. We need to pay it up. And the rich man who has to give this $10 million to tzedakah refuses to give the money. Not only is he not giving this poor man back his money, not only is he stealing this money from the poor man, because this money belongs to him, but he's also undermining the entire purpose of creation. For God created the world in such a way that He should be the rich man and not the poor man, and the poor man should come and ask back for his money. And therefore He's undermining the entire purpose of creation and why God created the world and how God created the world. And therefore you're taking the name of God in vain. Interesting story. There was a Jew who was a Munkach Chassid. And for a short while he was in Auschwitz, and then in a DP camp, and then through Chayus he came to New York, and they put him up with his wife in a hotel in Manhattan. He had no job, and he was very broken after the war, but every day they supplied him with a Yiddish newspaper. And on the 11th day of Shvat, in 1950, they read that today will be the Levaya, the burial and the funeral of Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe. He reads this and he says, you know, first of all, I have no job. I have nowhere to go anyway. Number 2 is, I always knew that the Munkach Rebbe and Chassidim were very close and fond of the Chabad Rebbes. So I should pay my last respects. I should go to the funeral, to the Levaya. He was so poor, he had no money for a cab. So he and another fellow together went around and they collected a few dollars, and they took the money and they ran from Manhattan with a taxi to Brooklyn. And they came to the funeral. As they were there by the funeral, they announced, only those that immersed in the mikvah can come close to carry the coffin. It's a big schus, a big honor to carry the coffin. So he approached the coffin, the Aron, the Holy Ark, to carry the Ark of the Rebbe. And one of the men there said to him, no, you were in water today. You went to the mikveh today. He rolled up his sleeve and he showed his numbers. He says, I wasn't in the water, but I was in the fire. The man stepped aside and allowed this Munkach Chassid to carry the coffin. He carried the coffin for a short while, and then later he made his way all the way to Old Montefiore Cemetery, where the Rebbe was interred. And there too he had the opportunity to take the shovel and put some sand into the grave. At these 2 opportunities, when he carried the coffin and when he put the sand into the grave, he said 2 words. He said, Rebbe Parnasa, Rebbe Parnasa. Rebbe I need a job. Rebbe, I need a job. Those were the two words he said, Rebbe Parnasa, Rebbe Parnasa, when he held the coffin, and then again when he shoveled the earth into the ground. After the funeral, he looked for a ride to go back to Manhattan. He had no money to get back to Manhattan. He went from one person to a second person to a third person, about 10 people. One after the other. Maybe you're going to Manhattan, maybe you're going to Manhattan. No, I'm sorry, we're going to Brooklyn. The 10th person he came over to, he says, maybe you're going to Manhattan. He says, no, I'm not. But here's a card, and if you need a job, call me tomorrow morning. He called this fellow the next morning, and he got a job. And he worked at that job from that day until the day he retired. And that was because of two words, Rebbe Parnasa, Rebbe Parnasa. The Rambam tells us the greatest charity is to give a person a job, because you don't make the person feel unworthy. You don't make him feel like a pauper. You give him back his pride, and you give him back his menschlichkeit, his human ability to work and to make money. So this is the concept of parnasa. This is the concept of tzedakah. So therefore we speak about the 5 levels of lo signov. Number 1, not to steal, not to take something that belongs to someone else. But number 2, to remind us that it also has to do with giving others and helping others. And therefore reminds us to give charity, and that Mashiach will come through charity. And that it's not enough that we give quantity but also quality, to give with a smiling face and to inspire the person and to give them hope. And furthermore, to remember that it's the greatest mitzvah, and this is a mitzvah that elevates the entire nation, the entire Jewish people. And finally, to remember that the tzedakah that we give is not ours, but rather God gives it to us to be able to give to the poor people. And as the Gemara tells us, that through the mitzvah of tzedakah, the Jewish people will be redeemed from this exile. As it says, Tzion b'mishpat tipada v'shaveh b'tzedakah, that through the giving of charity, Zion will be redeemed. And so we hope and pray to see the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days.